Pudgy Penguins has their token drop finally upon us. Luca Netz had come on the show back then talking about what we have ahead of ourselves to look at with Pudgy Penguins, and it's finally here. The Pengu token drop is happening, and it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this one all shapes up. As we've been watching this one, NFTs are somewhat coming back to life. Today's episode is brought to you by Akash Network, the world's premier decentralized compute marketplace. Check out Akash to buy and sell computing resources securely and efficiently. Purpose-built for public utility at akash.network. Good morning, everybody. Welcome into another week here at Coinage. I'm your host, Zach Guzman, coming to you live from our Brooklyn studios here in New York City. Happy Monday as we kick things off, per usual, recapping the biggest headlines in Web3 from the only community-owned show in Web3. And very excited to dig into what we're seeing play out on the charts, as it's another huge week with Bitcoin hitting a new record high today at 106,000, giving back a little bit of that, but still the momentum is surging as we've been highlighting over the last couple weeks. If you've been watching Coinage, I hope you're enjoying this rally because, as we've highlighted with Sean Farrell, the helps of him at Fundstrat, he's had $115,000 as his year-end price target since we had him on the show back in January, nearly 365 days ago. And it's getting scary close to that being right. He called 43,000 last year, by the way, and he nailed that. And now we're sitting here on the precipice of potentially seeing him nail it again. It's kind of scary, but also very cool that Coinage was ahead of the curve on all that. In fact, while we have this up, maybe I'll just shout out that, hey, look, even in August, we were saying, hey, look, he's doubling down on this. That was back when Bitcoin was around like 50K. A lot of people were very concerned in terms of where we were going to go after that. He doubled, tripled, quadrupled down, saying 115K end of year. I want to give Sean Farrell his props. Shout out to that guy. Coinage member, by the way, has an NFT as well. Smartest people in crypto. I've been saying it for a long time. Smartest people in crypto are Coinage members. Not too late to buy your NFT and become a co-owner of Coinage as well at Coinage.media. Shout out to the smartest DAO in the media space in crypto. Do want to highlight, though, why we are here at 106,000-ish. As far as fund flows, as we always do, those continue to stay strong. And not just really what we're seeing out of the CoinShares report, which again showed a little bit of a moderation, shall we say, versus last week in terms of how much money is flowing in through these crypto investment products. Texas, we want to, yes, there we go. We want to take a look at that chart. The numbers are still very strong overall when you look at it. In fact, we saw a continuation of inflows totaling $3.2 billion across all of these things. As is always the case, most of that, the majority going into Bitcoin investment products, about $2 billion of that into those. But not to be outdone, I do want to highlight, according to CoinShares, this is the 7th consecutive week that we've seen inflows into Ethereum investment products. Those ETFs catching a massive bid right now. As we are seeing, let me scroll down there, it's $1 billion, north of $1 billion in terms of week flows for Ethereum there. So again, not all Bitcoin all the time, also seeing Ethereum catch a bid here. So that's an important piece to consider when we look at where the opportunities are. As we've highlighted over the last few weeks, Ethereum probably coming out of that doldrum. And it does seem like Ethereum is turning a corner, at least in terms of where investments are coming from institutional capital at the very least right now. So I want to highlight that. I also want to highlight that the number that we are seeing come in through Monster, MicroStrategy, and this is a big piece as to why we expect to see, I'm in this camp at least, I will say this, not financial advice, but certainly my opinion, that Sean Farrell's going to be right. It's scary that he's going to be right again, but part of the thesis as to why we might see continued strength into the end of the year is not just because MicroStrategy is continuing to buy at essentially the same clip that we're seeing money flow into these Bitcoin ETFs, because again, Michael Saylor announced a new purchase today, this morning, as he's always done over the last couple Mondays, announcing that MicroStrategy has picked up another 15,000 Bitcoin or so for $1.5 billion. That now increases MicroStrategy's total Bitcoin holdings to 439,000, worth over $45 billion, purchased at an average price of just north of $61,000. So it's not just that in terms of strength coming from the ETFs, strength coming from MicroStrategy's continual buys. But part of the, I guess, bubble, as we've covered before, and I use that term very loosely just to get views, but the term bubble is being used because MicroStrategy has no end in sight for the playbook that is working. And really good write-up on this, by the way. I shared over the weekend. Going to have to search for it desperately right now. But the idea is that how long can MicroStrategy continue to sell debt and shares to keep this cycle going is the big question. And there was a huge boost in terms of why there seems to be no end in sight. Reason being is because MicroStrategy got added to the Nasdaq 100, which is a very nice thing. Part of the reason why that's so big is because a lot of capital is allocated to just the Nasdaq 100, the top companies that are included in that. On Friday, MicroStrategy got added, or at least got the green light to be added. We'll actually see that happen at the end of the month to wrap up the year. But the next big question is, what happens after that? Could it potentially be added to the S&P 500, which would, again, give huge institutional capital access to Bitcoin, whether they want it or not, because they just buy the basket of these 500 companies that are added to the S&P 500. And MicroStrategy has a shot. It's not exactly the same likelihood as what we saw from the Nasdaq 100, because normally, as our good friend Eric Balchunas at Bloomberg points out in a new tweet, because normally companies who are added to the S&P 500 need to show 4 straight quarters of profitability. Because of the accounting rules for MicroStrategy, they can't actually show that they're making money on their Bitcoin purchases, despite the fact that they definitely are. Now, I believe, north of $16 billion in paper profits just on the Bitcoin they've bought themselves. And so there is a huge accounting rule that's kind of being overlooked right now that has been in the works and now lets companies actually account for gains. It used to be the case that they would only have to put losses on their books. But now, as we flip the page and move into next year, those companies can actually finally start showing that they have made money and are making money on Bitcoin in real time, which could potentially change the whole idea of whether or not MicroStrategy, that is, had been profitable for those 4 quarters and could potentially also warrant inclusion in the S&P 500. Now, I say all this because this is essentially one of the big drivers right now in Bitcoin's price and this continuation. It was this tweet over the weekend from Jeff Park at Bitwise that got me thinking about all this too. And, you know, it's a really long, you could read all this if you want. You can go check out Jeff Park's kind of synopsis. I tried to simplify it even further because it was quite complicated. But essentially, just the idea there is, look, MicroStrategy is getting added to NASDAQ 100. There are increasing odds now that it gets added to the S&P 500. All this can continue. The good times roll on. And the party continues. And it doesn't really need to be much more complicated than that. And honestly, it's working right now. And I do not think, at least until the end of the year, none of that's going to stop working. And so when you consider all those things, it is very realistic, at least far less crazy than it seemed back in August when Sean Farrell was pounding the table and saying, I'm not backing down on my $115,000 price target. It looks a lot more likely as we sit here at 106 that we might cross that price target in the next couple of weeks. So we'll keep our eyes on that. Again, continually watching whether or not that will happen. A big piece to that, by the way, let's shift ahead and look ahead to Wednesday. Big piece to that thesis also is not just kind of Bitcoin specific or crypto specific. A big piece right now is macro and macroeconomics. I was getting roasted, by the way, on that tweet, shall we say, because I led with the fact that I have a Harvard econ degree. Maybe that's deserved. Maybe I'm getting trolled by other friends of the show. Keith Grossman giving me a nice little, hey, nice douche comment there. But look, I'm just saying that increasingly these macroeconomic factors are going to matter. They're going to matter because we are going to see a huge rate decision coming up from the Fed on Wednesday, whether or not they cut. Right now, by the way, the expectations, Texas, let me bring something else up here. We don't need to troll myself on my own show, maybe so long. But we do have the expectations that the Fed's going to cut on Wednesday. The big question is, what are they going to do beyond that 25 bips cut after that? What is the calendar year for 2025 look like in terms of how the Fed wants to play that? And that's the big question, because increasingly there are fears that we could hit a little pocket of stagflation next year, which of course would mean that perhaps the Fed is caught in a position where they have to look increasingly hawkish and say, hey, look, maybe we're not going to cut rates as much as everyone thinks next year. And that could potentially trigger some fund flows out of Bitcoin, could see some pressure on Bitcoin's price target. And so we'll have to wait and see what Jerome Powell says on Wednesday, but certainly going to be a pretty important piece to the puzzle as far as whether or not we do see continued strength into year end, depending on what he says. I think right now, if I'm not mistaken, that the odds on this are about 98% in terms of the expectations that we are going to see a rate cut on Wednesday. And look, Jay Powell is a man that has completely, sometimes you never know what you're going to get when you have Fed chairs kind of leading into these meetings. You never really know. Are they telling the truth? Are they trying to give it a little head fake? Because anytime that you do something, whether it's a rate cut, hold steady, whatever the decision is, if you do it in a way that is not choreographed, that's when you see the biggest impact, at least in terms of market expectations, in terms of what you want to happen from a policy perspective. Basically, right now, it's a 99% chance that we do see a 25 bips basis cut. That was a little redundant. That we see a 0.25 percentage point cut on Wednesday. So basically everyone and their mom expecting to see that. But the big question, as I said, is what happens after it, and perhaps we'll get some more guidance from Jay Powell when we get there on Wednesday. Of course, we'll cover it from Coinage.media for all the big headlines in Web3. But it's a big component. It's a big factor to keep our eyes on in terms of where we go. I also want to highlight, too, outside of macro, let's bring it back into the crypto space. I believe this might be one of the bigger stories. We covered them last year in our Crypto Project of the Year, which we're going to get to in a second, but Pudgy Penguins has their token drop finally upon us. Luca Netz had come on the show back then talking about what we have ahead of ourselves to look at with Pudgy Penguins, and it's finally here. The Pengu token drop is happening, and it's going to be pretty interesting to see how this one all shapes up. As we've been watching this one, NFTs are somewhat coming back to life. It's quite interesting to see this all play out because it wasn't so long ago that NFTs looked dead across the board. And I say that as a guy who has an NFT project here with us on Coinage. Of course, for Pudgy Penguins, look at this chart. This is kind of what we've been watching. 32 ETH is the floor price now. You could see that run up from about 8 ETH just, a month ago? A little bit over a month ago, 7 ETH in November. And so clearly a lot of people have been scooping these bad boys up, waiting for that token drop. And it looks like we are on the precipice, at least according to Luca Netz and everything that we've seen. Expectations are that this token drop could come out before the end of the year. And interesting also, Texas, I don't know if I sent this to you in time or not, but there was a chart of the Mocha token. No, we don't have it. It's all right. I'll bring it up over here because everyone's kind of speculating on where will this token drop to. Which projects are going to get it. And it's interesting because Mochaverse, who we had on the show, Yatsu, chairman over there at Mochaverse, at Animoca Brands, I should say. It's a pretty crazy chart. But they just got listed in South Korea, the Mocha token. And over the weekend, last night, we saw a huge, massive run up from about 8 cents to 40 cents in just a couple of hours. Now look at that. All the way back down to 16 cents. So a huge swing after that listing. Just goes to show, I think a lot of this stuff, price discovery in NFT land or any tokens tied to NFT projects, no one really knows how the hell to do these because no one really knows what is about to happen. No one knows if Mochaverse NFT holders, of which Coinage is a holder, by the way, if anyone who holds those NFTs might get a Pengu token allocation as well. So all this stuff is up in the air, but we should have some more details come this week as one of the most anticipated, I think, NFT token drops because you haven't seen too many of these go well. Of course, there was, the Ape token from before and what Bored Ape was able to do, but I don't think there's been much more of a consumer-focused project than Pudgy Penguins and what Luca Netz and co. has done, as we highlighted last year. Certainly a project worthy of consideration as one of the top ones out there. And so we'll see what the token does. I don't know. Can't say for sure that Coinage NFT holders are included in all this either. At least I haven't heard anything. But we did have Luca on the show last year. So I want to say maybe perhaps Coinage was ahead of the game in nominating Pudgy Penguins as one of our projects of the year back then. And we'll see what happens this time around. And also, again, as I said in that chart with Mocha Network, this is another thing that Coinage stands to benefit from, mostly because we have a token allocation there and did capitalize on a little bit of that. So if you're in the DAO, if you're an NFT holder, join our Telegram, join the Discord, let us know when things like this happen, because I can't see everything all at once. And so it is kind of part of our thesis that, hey, look, something like this could happen and someone in our community could flag it or say, hey, look, we should have bought a Pudgy Penguin, which, to be honest, maybe we should have bought a Pudgy Penguin last year. That would have been a good idea too. Floated it, didn't really do it, and kind of regret that a little bit now. But hey, these things happen. That was last year, though. Let's move on to this year, because as we've been doing, we've been highlighting the top projects in crypto, and we finally have some results to share in advancing the teams that you guys have all voted for in crowning Crypto Project of the Year 2024/25 edition. And the vote, one of our most contentious votes, actually. I'm going to try and bring that up. Or Texas, I don't know if you have the bracket, but either way, we've got some pretty big, yes, there's the updated bracket. We had a big, this is probably our most contested vote in terms of base and SWE. We just had the co-founder of SWE on, Denny. If you haven't watched that interview, go check it out. It's on our YouTube. It's also on our page right now, coinage.media. You can check it out. Why SWE is up 650% since we highlighted them last year. Turns out a lot of reasons why. And turns out a lot of those reasons probably suited to continue in 2025. So really good interview. Really excited to hear kind of some of those details from Denny and what that team has planned. However, wasn't enough to really top the enthusiasm that our community has for what Base has done. If you haven't watched that interview, we also had Jesse Pollock on the show talking about what Base has scheduled for next year and how some of that value accrual should maybe eventually shift back to the community and not just to Coinbase. A lot of people look at Base and say, hey, maybe that's a problem. Really good interview from Jesse Pollock, I thought. And so both of those are up on the site. You can dig into that, but it's Base that advances and now up against Avalanche, which itself has had a pretty good year. So this is kind of where we get into the interesting, exciting pieces of Crypto Project of the Year. Look, all these projects are great, and sometimes it's really hard to compare. I mean, how do you really compare what Thorchain has done with what Polymarket has done as a betting platform? I don't know. It's really difficult. How do you compare in the upper right how a Bitcoin layer 2 like stacks up, no pun intended, against, say, as a paralyzed EVM project? All these things are very difficult, which is why it's not me making these calls. It's you. And I appreciate everyone who's voted in these votes thus far. Of course, voting in Coinage DAO votes are how we track who's active and inactive in our DAO cooperative and who becomes eligible for patronage dividends that we're looking forward to at the end of the year. So it's been fun. If you have a Coinage NFT and haven't done so yet, there's still time to use it and head to coinage.media to become a full member. If you don't have one, well, it might be the last time you want to scoop one up here in 2024. Makes for good Christmas presents, by the way, if you're trying to do that as well. If you're in Web3 and you're trying to explain to someone what Web3 is all about, I think we're a pretty simple project to really wrap your brain around as a community-owned show that allows our viewers to stake with us, and thank you to everyone who does. I think that's everything that we had as, again, a very busy week. I will hint and tease this one last thing as we wrap up the year. SEC Commissioner Hester Peirce, Crypto Mom, coming back on Coinage. Always good insights from her in terms of what's happening under the hood, what stories we should be watching. We've had her on a couple times this year. She's hinted at a couple things. I think going to be very exciting to see what potentially is changing as Gary Gensler leaves in January, how that's going to impact immediately. The first things that the SEC under a new chair, if he is confirmed, a pro-crypto chair, what the agency wants to get done as the war on crypto is finally over, if you believe everything we're hearing coming out of DC. So going to be a very exciting interview. If you have any questions, per usual, hop into the Coinage Discord. Share what questions you want asked of Crypto Mom as we have her on this coming Thursday. Should be a very exciting interview. And of course, as always, our NFT holders will be able to watch that first when it's posted on Coinage at coinage.media, and then thereafter on our YouTube. As we wrap up, I just want to say, let's see where things go. Per usual, we end on the charts as we begin on the charts. Bitcoin north of $106,000. A strong wrap up to the year, if you believe the people who are talking about it on our show. Smartest people in crypto. Per usual, you can buy your Coinage NFT now. Co-own this, the only community-owned media DAO in Web3. That's going to do it for us here today. Catch all the big headlines at coinage.media. Zach Guzman saying so long. We'll see you again soon.